What's up, YouTube? Today I want to talk a little bit about Bitwig's built-in FM-4 and Phase-4 devices. So this video is a result of a little bit of a conversation I had with another music YouTuber, Alckemy Neuro. If you guys don't know him, you should definitely go check him out. He actually made a video about FM-4, which got me using it a little bit more. And then we spoke about it a little bit, and we spoke about some of the limitations that it has. And that got me thinking about maybe doing a video to try and make the case for why I think both FM-4 and Phase-4 are actually underrated. So yeah, this is that video. And big shout out to Alckemy if you're watching this. So anyway, let's dive in and have a look. So in this video, I'm going to cover two of Bitwig's built-in devices, both the FM-4 and the Phase-4, which are kind of similar to, I guess, Ableton's operator, but they're both different in a particular way, which I'm going to try outline. So firstly, I want to dive into FM-4, which is a little bit more basic in my opinion, and then I want to show you some of the things that you can do with Phase-4 and how you can actually take it to the next level using Bitwig's grid. So anyway, FM-4, I guess it's kind of Bitwig's answer to something like operator, but it's a little bit different. I guess it's closer to traditional FM synthesis, stuff like the older DX7s and that kind of thing, where you were limited in the wave shapes that you could use to create your kind of FM sounds. So one of the coolest things I think about Bitwig is that each of the devices has their own kind of panel which you can open, and then you can actually have a look at each of the waveforms, for example, of the operators, or depending on what device you have, you've got various different other things that show in the kind of advanced panel. So if we play a note, you can see that we have a display of exactly what's going on here. So I want to just start off by setting everything to default, so we can actually set everything on the matrix here to 0. I'm going to explain what this matrix does in a moment, and then what I want to do is just double click each of these so that everything is back down to 0, so that there's no weird detuning and that kind of thing. So straight off the bat, in terms of the matrix in FM-4 versus the operator in Ableton, I may be wrong in saying this, but I don't believe that you actually have a value control for each of the inputs in the matrix in Ableton. I believe you can only choose from a predetermined set of algorithms, which are, for example, like 4 and 3 FMing 2, which is then FMing 1, and all these types of things. There is a freedom in the matrix in that you can kind of stack these up in any way that you want. So you're not limited to like the 8 different algorithms that you have, for example, with Ableton's operator or other kind of traditional FM synths. So you can recreate any of those algorithms, but you can also create your own unique ones, which I think is really special about this type of matrix. So, like I said, the limitation with FM-4 is that I believe each of the waveforms is limited to just a sine wave. And I believe that's because it uses frequency modulation as opposed to phase modulation, which a lot of other plugins and stuff, and even the original DX7s, I believe, don't quote me on this because I may be wrong, but I believe most of the FM synths that we know actually use phase modulation, and because of that they're able to get away with stuff like modulating it with waveforms that may create inharmonicities with traditional FM. We could talk for days about the complexities of FM synthesis versus phase modulation synthesis and that kind of thing, but at the end of the day it's just easier to know that in a programming realm, it's easier and less CPU intensive to create something that's phase modulated as opposed to actual frequency modulation. Most plugins are using that. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe FM uses actual frequency modulation. So they limit you to sine waves because other waveforms would end up generally sounding not so good and noisy and inharmonic, and would generally result in detuning the carrier wave and all sorts of things. So I'm going to get into Phase-4, which is Bitwig's kind of answer to that side of things in a moment. But we could also just talk about the traditional aspect of FM synthesis and the beauty of why it's such a good learning tool in terms of sound design. as you can see here, I've set all of these back down to 0, and now you can see that these operators are all at traditional sine waves. But they were different waveforms before, and that's because with traditional FM synthesis, we're kind of building our own waveforms up from stacking the modulation of all of these different waveforms in interesting ways. And I think that's the kind of beauty of FM synthesis. It's not always to create a specific modern sound or anything like that. It's about, I guess, learning as well as, using that to be able to, for example, craft a sound that evolves from one sound to another without using all these different really complex tools. One example is, recursive frequency modulation ends up in a sound that sounds like white noise. And if you modulate something's recursive modulation, it can end up sounding like a drum sound when it goes from a noise to a fundamental sine wave. So I'm going to discuss that a little bit later in the video, but let's just talk about, building waveforms from scratch in an FM synth. You've got these 1, 2, 3, 4 with the colors corresponding to the oscillators along the left-hand side. So these are the inputs for the matrix. So for example, if we want oscillator 2 to modulate oscillator 1, we would just turn this up, and as you can see, we've got values all the way from 0 to 999. Unlike most synths, which generally have a kind of value of 0 to 100, we've got 1,000 values to step between, which means that the resolution of the different sounds that we could create is much higher, technically speaking. Whether you can hear that difference or not, I don't know. So we've set it so that oscillator 2, or let's call them operators, so that operator 2 is now frequency modulating operator 1. And now you can see it's actually changed the waveform to something that's kind of like, you see what happens here is the pitch is low, and then the pitch goes up, 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 and then it goes down again. So it actually exactly models this kind of curve here in that pitch. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but just seeing this kind of stuff visually is so powerful in terms of learning tools. Now we could go and, for example, let's modulate 3 into 2. Do you see how much difference the sound makes from these very tiny incremental differences? For example, from like 399 to 405. And so if we interpolated those 1,000 values into 100 values, that kind of difference in sound would be, you wouldn't be able to hear it in a sweep. So for sound design, this huge value sweep is very, very nice, actually, for getting really complex with it. So far, it's sounding pretty decent, kind of psytrance, FM lead type of thing. So remember what I was saying about the recursive modulation. And the one downside about this matrix system is because of obviously all of the kind of values and the incremental amount of values, they haven't actually allowed modulation of these matrix values in Bitwig. However, what you can do is you can modulate this amount, which is what sends to the matrix. So for example, I want to set up this recursive modulation. So let's turn this up to 999. So 1 is sending back into itself. And this results in the sound of like white noise. But we don't want that white noise present in the sound all the time. Say, for example, we just want to use it as a transient peak. So let's turn the mod down. And now we don't hear the white noise. And now what we can do is we can actually put an ADSR over here. It's just an envelope. And let's turn this down, the decay really tight, and then let's set this to modulate that mod parameter. So we can take that kind of idea of modulating these mod parameters And let's just put in, for example, like another ADSR, and let's get this one to modulate the third operator, which was modulating the second one. So let's set this like this. But here, let's set, for example, it a slight attack, so that we have that kind of transient from the white noise. Then the attack sweeps in. And then let's not go sustain all the way down. Let's listen to what this sounds like. Can you hear that kind of amount of sonic variation that we have without even thinking about filters and effects and all that kind of thing? From just thinking about how we're routing these different operators. And I think this is the essence of FM synthesis, you know, this huge sonic palette with very, very simple building blocks. We can, of course, take advantage of effects on top of this. You know, for example, we could nest some effects inside this effect layer over here. What we could also do is we could nest some note effects inside here, which I think is, again, one of the beauties of Bitwig. So let's, for example, add a note repeat, and we could add a Euclidean sequencer to this. So all we need to do is just hold a note. So then we could add like a filter here. We could also add a delay. Bitwig's delay plus, absolutely phenomenal. So now a cool thing to do is to jump in here and modulate some of these ratios. So here, actually, what I should have done is in the note effects, let's put in a transpose. This is a little trick to get some nice squelchy FM sounds. What we want to do is we want to actually transpose the MIDI downwards. Let's say, for example, 2 octaves, and then let's turn all of these up. So 4 and 8, for example. And now we can actually modulate these ratios downwards to get like squelchier FM sounds, because obviously now the pitch is going to be down by several octaves. Okay, let's look at Bitwig's Phase-4. So this has a very similar idea, although we are not just limited to sine waves here. You can actually choose between various different waveforms, and then you've got a shape parameter, which I guess is kind of like, for some of them is kind of like a filter, for some of them is like a PWM. So you have various different shape parameters that you could use. I guess the limitation here is you can't load wavetables like you can in some other phase modulation synths. However, there is a workaround which I want to talk about. So what we can do is we can actually group this by pressing Ctrl G. I'm going to add, in this layer, I'm going to add a grid. And in this grid, we are going to just take that away. We want to put a tool afterwards and turn down the volume, definitely. And then here, what we want to do is set this to a wavetable. So here we can go ahead and actually choose from wavetables that we may like have already installed. I've got a Dada Side Tables V3 Glitch 1 is one of my favorite ones. So here what we can do is we can actually use one of the modulators, which is called audio rate. And what this does is this pulls audio from any input. So let's instrument layer chains polygrid out. And you can see here, it's actually pulling audio from this. If we change these settings, you can see it actually changes there. Turn down speed. So we can actually use this to modulate parameters here. For example, let's modulate the phase of this oscillator. But just for a more basic demonstration, let me just load up something a little bit less crazy. It's like something like that. So what we can do is let's set up a macro over here on this instrument layer. What this macro is going to do is it's going to modulate this index. So let's just call this wavetable position, and then we want to set up a macro that's going to modulate this amount of modulation that's being applied here. So what we can actually do is let's set up a attenuator over here, and this is literally going to be our wavetable amount, because you can see now it's actually it's turned down the input to this audio rate modulator, and now that becomes our FM amount. Let's create a macro, set this to the attenuator. That's now our FM amount. Check this out. So we're not just limited to using outside sources to modulate now. We could use basically Phase-4, how it works is each of these modulators has an input which modulates from the external source. So we could, for example, send in a little bit from each of these other operators, let's call them. So in Phase-4, you've also got these modulation inputs on the filter. So what this does is this actually sends this frequency to modulate this filter parameter. And that just gives it a little bit of extra kind of like analog sounding kind of character to the filter. And you've even got this XY pad in which you can control all of these parameters with like a single sweep, which is pretty cool. This could make like a really nice kind of pad or atmospheric kind of sound. So let's put a long attack onto this macro which we've created. And then let's just end this off with a bit of reverb. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, a nice quick one, is let's say, for example, remove all of this. We could do a similar thing to what I explained with the audio rate modulator, but all inside a grid. So we have an oscillator here called Phase-4. So what we can do is we can actually, for example, use this, and let's duplicate this, and let's set this one to a wavetable. Then let's set this output to modulate the phase of this one. Then we can set this to, what was it? Which one did we use again? Was it this AM? Yeah, I think it was this one. Had that nice ringy sound. So with this one, what we can do is we can actually send this same wavetable to modulate the filter with that frequency modulation. Do you see how it gives it that like grittiness? Awesome. That is about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to be uploading these Bitwig device presets to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link in the description. Again, big shout out to Alckemy Neuro for, starting this conversation. If you want to check out what he's doing, check out the link in the description, or the other link in the description. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. See you guys next time. Cheers.